understand, is sharing with his colleagues.
Very much, Las Cian Corla. In the ordinary course of events, this would be one of those very dull debates where we come along and we give our comments on the Constituency Commission's responses, but then we all accept it. And certainly in the previous debate from the previous Constituency Commission, that was certainly my own position. I do want to address the issue of the missed opportunity of giving some recognition to the North of Ireland, and I'll respond directly to Deputy Castles on that. But before I do that, I do want to kind of raise the issue of the two the two deep freeze seats, as Deputy Castles mentioned them. Look, obviously this isn't the government's fault. We're all caught in a bind whereby a delayed exit is going to result in two of the successful winners of the seats, subject to this legislation going through, will have a lesser status. I suppose what I would have liked to hear from the Minister today is an indication of what mechanism the government is looking at in terms of the amendments. I can think of only two. Either A, the additional seats in Dublin and Ireland South are the ones that go on hold, or B, you take the three constituencies overall and whoever gets the lowest number of votes. The problem for that second one, obviously, that could end up in a disproportionate lack of representation for Ireland North West. But I think if you could give us some indication of where the thinking of the department is, that would be helpful. I also think it would be useful if people here understood what that status means. Is it that it would be the same as Croatia pre-accession, for example, that there are certain entitlements that people get? They don't just sit at home for the period in time in question. And if the Minister could provide any clarity on that, that would be very helpful. Let me deal with, I suppose, the political point, which I was going to deal with anyway before Deputy Castles made his remarks. I do think, from a political point of view, this was a missed opportunity. I accept the fact that the Constituency Commission has a certain limitation in terms of its statutory remit, and we teased that out at the private briefing session with the officials. But I think the government could have seriously looked at the possibility of having a designated constituency for the European Parliament elections for the North of Ireland. And the legal case is actually very strong, and as the Minister will know, we submitted a very detailed legal opinion on the matter, which I think is worthy of discussion. But I also think, leaving aside the legal arguments, given the fact that the majority of people in the North of Ireland voted to remain in the European Union, and given the fact that Brexit of any kind, but particularly the chaotic Brexit that seems to be presenting itself to us, will have a disproportionately negative impact on people in the North of Ireland, I actually think there was a political imperative to seriously consider this. And I suppose my concern is notwithstanding rhetoric in second stage speeches, I haven't seen anywhere other than our proposals where it has been seriously considered. So I'm not going to make a political speech. What I'm going to do is read out some of the key conclusions from the legal opinion, and then I'm happy to give a copy to Deputy Castles so he can consider it more fully, because while he might not agree with us, at least he would then have to accept that it wasn't a superficial case we made, but one that actually took quite some consideration. So this is I'm going to quote directly from the legal opinion. The first is, in the conclusions, the solicitors and barristers involved in the opinion said the extension of voting rights in European parliamentary elections to EU citizens in the North of Ireland would have to be limited to Irish citizens as opposed to all residents with jurisdiction. I think that's regrettable. I would have preferred if you could extend it to all residents in the North of Ireland, but that's not legally possible, and that's the reason why it would only be extended to Irish citizens. In producing the report, the legal opinion suggested that actually the Boundary Commission could have looked at these broader issues, and it makes the case in the context of its promotion of values contained in Bunreacht and the EU treaties. But crucially, Member States are granted a wide measure of discretion, albeit subject to the treaty and secondary EU legislation, in how they organise their electoral systems, including elections to the European Parliament. So there is scope legally for this to be seriously considered, at least. The legal opinion then goes on to say, it is current state of development, European Union law does not require that Member States provide for external voting for non-resident citizens, but it imposes no restrictions on the ability of Member States to extend franchises to European elections to non-resident citizens. So there's no impediment in European law for such a thing happening. And indeed, the legal experts suggested that the extension of the franchise to non-resident citizens is consistent with the democratic principles on which the European Union is founded. I think that's an eminently sensible proposition. Goes on to say the extension of the franchise to non-resident citizens is consistent with widespread state practice within the European Union. Many other member states already have certain arrangements that are not dissimilar. And the extension of the franchise could be said to complement the requirement on the UK government to ensure no diminution of rights of citizens in the north of Ireland occurring as a result of Brexit. And again, that's plainly self-evident. We do have, and we've been discussing this before, and I know the Minister is bringing forward legislation and subsequent referendums, but we have a uniquely restrictive system of external voting, and that's without doubt. And a challenge by an Irish citizen deprived of his or her voting rights is at least a real possibility in certain circumstances. The legal opinion goes on to say the extension of voting rights to Irish citizens resident in the north of Ireland would be consistent with EU law in the view of the legal experts. And the creation of a new constituency for the north of Ireland is primarily a matter of policy choice for this House. So it's a political matter for us to decide if that's something we want to do or not. And while Deputy Castles does make a legitimate point in terms of that it would result in a divergence of representation, I would imagine that folks in the north of Ireland would be happy with any representation in the European Parliament, even if the ratio was disadvantageous to them, which it would be in this particular instance, than having no representation at all, and that's something the legal opinion went. We can have a debate about Stormont, but this is about a serious proposition of ensuring, in the first instance, Irish citizens in the north of Ireland, no matter what their political opinion is, have some representation. I would have thought that's something Fianna Fáil would at least like to have discussed, as opposed to dismiss in order to score political points, but that's your own business. The final kind of couple of points I'd like to raise in the legal opinion is that our Constitution imposes no restrictions on the ability of the state to extend the franchise in European parliamentary elections to Irish citizens. It is constitutionally permissible and possible. Whether or not you want to do it or not is a secondary issue. And in fact, we would argue, and the legal opinion argues, that it would be consistent with the principles of Bunreacht na hÉireann, and particularly the amendments post the Good Friday Agreement. And that it would be consistent with the current citizenship regime. And then there's a series of more detailed points. So I suppose the point is this. It is not, contrary to Deputy Castle's suggestion, a populist move. It is a very serious and credible proposal which we think all of the parties in this House should have considered. And I have to say, if I was an SDLP voter in the north, if I was a Sinn Féin voter in the north, if I was an Alliance Party voter in the north, I'd be a little bit disappointed at the way in which Deputy Castles has presented this, because what all of those people are telling all of us, and the government knows this because they're engaging very extensively with northern public opinion, is that the worst case scenario for people in the north is to have no representation. Please, Deputy Castles. No, in fact, in the last election, Deputy Castles, our vote increased, and I would be more than happy to contest elections against Fianna Fáil in the north of Ireland whenever Fianna Fáil. Whenever Fianna Fáil grows a backbone and decides to actually contest in the north of Ireland, I have no difficulty you arguing the case for taking your seats in Westminster and then taking them up if you're elected. But while you stand on the sidelines of electoral politics in the north of Ireland, I don't think you're in a position to question anybody's integrity or the representation any political party provides. Our vote has actually increased because of the positive stand we've taken to ensure the rights of Northern nationalists and Republicans are properly protected. But what I would say is this, and again, we can have an argument about what's going on in the north of Ireland any day you want. That is my point exactly, Ceann Comhairle. This is a serious and credible proposition to try and find a way to ensure at least Irish citizens in the north of Ireland, the overwhelming majority of whom want to remain in the European Union, have a voice and have representation. And I have to say, I am absolutely amazed that Fianna Fáil don't even want to discuss it or consider the proposition. But I would be interested in hearing the Minister's response to those. And while I appreciate the very tight time frame we now have to get this legislation through, means in all likelihood it's impossible, I still would have liked to think the government would have considered the matter actively and given us a substantive response, because I know the Minister would take these issues much more seriously than maybe his opposition counterpart on the other benches.